going to start the presentation about the Global Biodiversity Score and how we assess biodiversity footprint for companies and financial assets. So the agenda today is to give you some context about CDC Biodiversité and our biodiversity footprint team, and then you'll have a case study from ADEME. Then we will present to you the context of biodiversity footprint, the methodology of the Global Biodiversity Score, and how we do biodiversity footprint assessment. Then we will have two case studies from Hermès and from La Française des Jeux. Then we will see the offer for financial institutions with also a case study from La Financière de l'Échiquier. And we will end this session with information about our B4B Plus Club and the GBS trainings. So starting ahead with CDC Biodiversité. CDC Biodiversité is a company dedicated to biodiversity. It's a private subsidiary of the Caisse des Dépôts et Consignations Group, which is the biggest public financial institution in France. CDC Biodiversité is a French consulting and engineering firm specialized in positive actions for biodiversity. We have a wide range of services. Basically, we have long-term restoration and ecological management with ecological compensation actions for companies, and also voluntary ecological restoration with the provision of long-term land investments. We have training and research with, in particular, publication on economic and biodiversity topics. And finally, we have studies and engineering to think about the strategy and integration of biodiversity into economic models, and also the development and implementation of biodiversity footprint measurement with the Global Biodiversity Score tool. Regarding the biodiversity footprint team, you have Joshua Berger, which is the head of the department, and then we have a transversal team for development, a team dedicated for the B4B Plus Club with Justine, a team for biodiversity footprint assessment for companies with myself, Manon, a starting team with Joao for local authorities, the financial team with Violette, and finally the training team with Rose. And now just going onto the Menti to start knowing each other. Okay, so you can connect with the code and answer the first question if you come as a member of the B4B Plus Club as a company or a financial institution, or if you're not yet a member of our club, or if you're just curious, and we have some curious here today. Okay, and you can also tell us more about the economic sector you belong to. We have agriculture, mining, electricity, construction. Okay, we have financial services, education, students. Great. Okay, so I will come back to the slide, and we'll have the case study from ADEME with Noam, Léandri.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes, hello Noam.
Fine, hello everybody. I'm Noam Léandri. I'm the Secretary General of ADEME, the French Environment Agency. I would like to talk today with you about the application of the GBS on the ADEME's site, because we have experimented this score, this biodiversity score, on how proper sites, especially the headquarters in Angers, where I am speaking now. Just to give you to explain what is ADEME. ADEME is a French environment agency. We have more than 1,000 people working here. We are in France in every region. We have 33 sites, territorial sites. And we have three main tasks. The first is to make studies about environment topics, to give information to the public, to the ministry, to companies, and so on. The second task is to support ecological project with money. So we have a 2 billion budget this year. Its purpose is to be given to companies or public sectors that have a project that needs to be supported, subsidized. And the third task is to support research and development, innovation at a large scale, especially with the what we talk we call the investment plan France 2030. Because we are one of the four operator of this plan. So we the issue of biodiversity is not in the task of ADEME. We deal with all the issues of ecological issues except biodiversity, because there is another agency called the French Office for Biodiversity, and it is its task. But we are very interesting in the fact that we don't not harm the question of biodiversity when we give subsidies, when we just create information on questions of all the tasks we have to do. So we have experimented the GBS on two sites. I say those. So the first is the headquarters with about a third of our staff working here, and another one in our in Normandy, in Hérouville-Saint-Clair. It's near Caen. We put all the data we needed in the GBS, and the result is quite clear. Maybe you can move on to the next slide. Just in information, more information. We have deal with this exercise with GBS in the same time as we were doing our carbon bilan, our carbon assessment, because we supposed, we make the hypothesis that most of the data we need for carbon score is the same as for biodiversity score, and that's right. Actually at the end it was half right, because half of the data we need for one is used for the other. So it was I think it's a good deal if you are supposed to do your carbon score to make it in the same time. What do we have as a result? We saw that our main impact is about meat animals, because we have a restaurant in our head office headquarters. But the other main impact are on the services we uses. So I don't know if you have more information to give on that slide. Maybe you can move on to the next one. I think this is more important and more interesting for you, because we have calculated, thanks to this score, that we can we are in the limit of the planet. It means you can see that in the green circle. We are inside the limit, the planetary limits. This is the first information. It's very important to have it in mind. On the other hand, there is a bad news. The fact is that we every year our impact is growing. Little by little, we will be closer to the planetary limits. So we need to take actions to reduce this intensity and to stop the augmentation of our biodiversity impact. And so that's what we are dealing with today. We are making a plan to have some actions that will reduce our impact and the annual growth of our impact in order to respect the planetary boundaries and to reduce our own impact in order to reduce all the global impact. So I don't think it's already done, but thanks to this score, you are more conscious of the impact we can have on biodiversity. It was not. Sorry. We were still aware of the issue because, as an example, our main sites are labelized with the French LPO. It means we can, for the faune, we have a lot of action for we have already done, but we know that it's on food that we may probably have the more impact, and so we need to give more action on that. So that's my this is my experience about this score, and we were very happy to work with CDC Biodiversity on that. We are still maybe we will generalize this work on all our sites. It takes some time, so some money too. So we have to make up our mind on that, but probably we will shortly decide to generalize the work in order to have a clear map of our impact in France, because we are only in France, and so this is the same as we do on carbon footprint. So it may be I think a good example to give to the other agencies and companies.
Thank you very much, Noam. I'm going to switch on the Menti to see if we have some questions for you. Let's see. See all the question. I think there was a question about the production of goods purchased. I think this one is more for us. I can let Amandine answer this question. And okay, the next one is on taxonomy. Okay, so Amandine, if you want to answer.
Yes, thank you, Manon. So yes, indeed, we have considered the location of the production of goods purchased if the information was available, because in the GBS, so the impact factor is also linked to the location of the goods production. So for some products, we were able to have this information and have included it in the computation. But when the information was not available, we just made assumptions.
Thank you. And I think the question about taxonomy, we have Joshua who will answer it.
Yeah, and I don't know, Noam, if you want to follow up on what Amandine said on the location. after I answer maybe. So on the GBS and the taxonomy, we are going to touch upon that a bit later, actually quite later in the presentation. But the GBS seeks to also contribute to answering the question of the taxonomy about significant contribution and do not significant harm. However, it does not provide a screening of the DNSH criteria directly. So when you conduct a biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS, you won't get the table saying whether you comply with the do not significant harm requirements. But it does help, and we are also we get queries from companies to provide that kind of service while we do the biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS, and so we are working on that, but it's not yet available.
Okay, thank you, Joshua. I think there's no other questions. If you have specific questions for ADEME, please write them now. And also just general information on the Menti, so you can put your questions and you can also like the questions that you see. As sometimes we have a lot of questions, we will answer the questions with the most liked questions. Okay, I think no more questions then, so we can come back to the presentation. Thank you very much, Noam. And if we have any more questions, we will give them to you later.
Fine. Bye-bye. We're
Bye.
with the meeting.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm handing over to Justine to present you some context and overview of biodiversity footprint.
Yes, thank you, Manon. Now I'm gonna give you a quick context and an overview of the biodiversity footprint today. So what is the context? The context is that we have a massive loss of ecological integrity. In 2010, we have lost around 32% of global terrestrial MSA, which means that we turned into parking lots the total area of Europe, North America, and Oceania. And this trend is expected to continue because in 2050, we are expected to lose around 9.5 global terrestrial MSA more. So we will turn into parking lots the total area of China and also Mongolia, as you can see on the right. And what is causing this biodiversity erosion? The IBES, which is the equivalent of IPCC for climate, but for biodiversity, has identified 5 main pressures on biodiversity. So land use, water and sea use change, resource exploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive species. And they are causing biodiversity erosion on the 3 ecosystems, so land, freshwater, and marine ecosystem. And as you can see on the right, they are causing loss of biodiversity. For example, 25% of species are not threatened with extinction today. And how the company are acting, how they can measure their impacts. There is 3 situations for the companies. Companies that have relatively small impacts, but developed a framework like infrastructure and extractive industry. Actually, they have locally a strong impact, but at a global level, it's a small impact. And they already have a developed framework like the mitigation hierarchy. In orange, you can see companies like consumer good business that have a high impact, but no clear idea of what to do. And on the left, in purple, you can see companies that have significant impacts, but no clear idea of what to do, but they have actually certifications to prevent biodiversity loss, like organic agriculture or FSC, for example, for the sector of forestry and agriculture. But they don't really know what are their impacts and how they reduce their biodiversity impacts. And now we will go back to the Menti to know if you are familiar with the 20 Aichi targets. So you already answered this question. So yeah, some of you are not familiar with the 20 Aichi targets. So the 20 Aichi targets are was the global framework for biodiversity between 2010 and 2020. So they were the targets on biodiversity, and none of them have been met yet. So today, the CDB, the Convention on Biological Diversity, is working on the post-2020 framework for biodiversity. They published the first draft to support the COP15 that will be held in Montreal at the end of the year. And inside this first draft, they identify 4 goals on biodiversity and target action to reduce impacts, and also tools and solutions to reduce impacts on biodiversity. And the GBS can support those recommendations on ecological biodiversity, and by measuring the impact on biodiversity and setting and allow companies to set targets. And especially for target 15 on sustainable production and supply chains, which says to assess and report dependencies and impacts on biodiversity for companies, and also to reduce negative impacts by at least a half and increase positive impacts. So it's a very ambitious target, and the GBS can help to reach these targets by measuring and reporting impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. And also the GBS can help companies to set targets. So in order to reach the, to reduce negative impact by at least half, and also to reduce, to increase positive impacts. And also the GBS can track how the impacts are reduced. So here you have figure on the remaining biodiversity. So on the y-axis, you have the MSA, so the remaining biodiversity. 100% is untouched ecosystem, so you have all the biodiversity. And on the x-axis, you have the year, so between 2010 to 2050. And you can see that between 72% and 100%, you are in a safe operating space for biodiversity. And below the 72%, below the planetary boundary, the biodiversity is endangered. And you can see that in 2010, we have already crossed the planetary boundary. If you remember, we have lost 32% of global terrestrial MSA, which means that we are now at 68%. We were at 68% in 2010. And if we continue business as usual, it's the gray line you can see. In 2050, we will be at 58.5%. So what is saying the CBD the CBD is saying that we have to bend the curve. We will most likely have to bend the curve to reach the safe operating space. We will have the first step, which is stop eroding biodiversity by 2030, and then to restore biodiversity, to have biodiversity gain between 2030 to 2050 in order to reach around 74 to 79% MSA. And what are now the major trends that are driving companies to measure their impacts? So first, biodiversity is now very interested for management of operational and market risk and opportunities. There is also a strong demand from investors that wants company to report their biodiversity impacts. So for example, there is an initiative that you can see on your screen, the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge, working on that topic. And also you have regulations, future regulations like the EU taxonomy, which is which is asking to report biodiversity impacts. One of the initiatives that we also have is the Science-Based Target Network, which is working on a protocol for companies to assess and to track their impact and to reduce their impact on biodiversity. This protocol is on 5 steps that you can see on your screen. 1, assess, 2, interpret, 3, measure, 4, act, and 5, track. And CDC Biodiversité thinks that step 1 can be covered during a full biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS. And step 2 and 3 can partially be addressed during a BFA with the GBS. But for step 2 to 5, there is no clear guideline yet. So the SBTN is still working on those steps. So yeah, it will be completed soon, we hope. So now we'll go back to the Menti to know what's biodiversity measurement tool do you know of? So as you may know, there is a lot of biodiversity measurement tools like STAR, EPNL, BFFI, PDF. So some of you know the STAR tool from UECN, and some of you know biodiversity measurement tools. Okay, so most of you know the STAR tool. Okay. Okay, interesting. So maybe we go back here to the slide just to present you the biodiversity footprint existing tools. So here you have all the tools on biodiversity footprint, and they have different perimeter, as you can see in column. So there is tools for public policy, corporate and portfolio, supply options, product and services, and project and sites. And there are also different business applications supported. So in row, you can see A, assessment and rating, B, biodiversity accounting, and C for biodiversity management and performance. And the color are for the metrics. You can see different metrics. In green, you have metrics on ecosystem like MSA and PDF. You also have metrics on species population, for example, the dark green. And you also have metrics on species like the STAR tools from IUCN and extinction risk. And you also have metric on monitoring. And what you can see on this map is that the GBS is our is based on the perimeter corporate and portfolio, but it's also supporting assessment, rating, and biodiversity accounting. And those tools are on different perimeter and for different applications, so they can be used together. For example, you can use the STAR tool and the GBS. They can complete each other. And I give the floor to Violette to present the Global Biodiversity Score.
Hello, everyone. I will now deep dive into the presentation of the Global Biodiversity Score tool with a few methodological concepts you have to have in mind to better understand the results of an evaluation. So first, about the metric we use. So the GBS uses the mean species abundance metrics, which describes the ecosystem integrity. So it's a metric in percentage that goes between 0% until 100%. And here on the slide, you have an example for two kinds of ecosystem. And you can see that at 100%, you have a pristine ecosystem, completely undisturbed. And when the ecosystem is disturbed, the MSA will decrease until it reaches 0% if the ecosystem is totally destroyed. So how do we compute the mean species abundance in percentage? So GMSA accounts only for species that are present in the undisturbed situation, and the ratios of species abundance between this situation and the disturbed situations cannot exceed 1. So on the slide, you have examples of computation of MSA with one undisturbed situation. So you can see in the undisturbed situation, you have 3 species that are present. And so the remaining biodiversity in MSA is 100%. And then you have 2 different disturbed situations. In the first disturbed situation, you have 61% of remaining biodiversity. So you can see here that we will not compute the additional frog that is present in this situation in comparison to the undisturbed situation. And then you have the second disturbed situation. So you can see that here the remaining biodiversity is at 72%, so it's higher than in the disturbed 1 situation. So we can account for loss, but also for gains in biodiversity. So then the final impacts in the GBS will be computed in MSA square kilometers because we multiply the remaining biodiversity in MSA by the impacted surface in square kilometer. And so what you can have in mind is that an impact of 1 MSA square kilometer would be equivalent to the total artificialization of 1 square kilometer of undisturbed natural ecosystem. On the right of the slide, you have an example of calculation for a pristine forest that would be converted into a plantation on 100 square kilometers. So you take the difference in the MSA between these 2 kinds of forest, and then you multiply it by the impacted surface. So now we can maybe go back to the Menti. Though the question is, according to you, which will be the aspects of biodiversity that are measured with the mean species abundance? So there is different kind of biodiversity. Indeed, biodiversity can be defined as the diversity of living species, also as a diversity, as a genetic diversity inside the species, and it can be also defined at the ecosystem level. So it's the diversity of ecosystems around the globe. So yeah, I can say you mainly think that the MSA will account for the species abundance of a given ecosystem. Okay, so to continue on the GBS presentation, maybe a few elements about the model of the GBS. So the GBS uses a pressure impact relationship model. The idea is that it's not feasible at a company level to assess directly the mean species abundance on the field. So we will assess the contribution of a company to pressures exerted on biodiversity, and that are the direct cause of biodiversity loss. And then these contributions to pressures will be converted into final impacts using the Global model. So on the slide, you see the 5 main impact drivers listed by the IPBS, which is a scientific reference body concerning biodiversity. So there is 5 main drivers. First, land and sea use change, then direct exploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species. So in the GBS, the 4 first of these pressures are covered with 11 sub-pressures covering the terrestrial and freshwater biodiversity, and not yet the marine biodiversity. And also we do not cover yet the invasive alien species. If you want to go a bit further in the methodology, so as I said previously, we use the pressure impact relationship model. So we assess pressures, and then these pressures are converted into final impacts. So here you have a global overview of the functioning of the GBS. So first, there is an economic activity of a company with some associated data as turnover and purchases. This economic activity induces what we call inventories. So for instance, commodities, water consumption and withdrawal, emission of GHG, etc. These inventories will induce pressures I showed previously, and finally these pressures are going to be translated into final impacts on biodiversity. So the main principle of the GBS is that we can use data at each step of this model, and then we compute the relationship between the different boxes of this model in order to assess the final impact on biodiversity. So here you have an example of one impact, and how do we compute this impact, and what are the different kind of data that we can use at each step of the model. So the example is for a poultry meat business, and we focus on the impact on land use associated to the poultry feed production. So at the first step of the model, at the financial step, we would have a turnover of poultry meat done in a country of activity. Then at the inventory level, we would have the tonnage of corn needed in order to feed this poultry. At the pressure level, we would have the surface of field in square kilometer to produce this corn. And finally, at the impacts and biodiversity state level, we would have a complete exhaustive ecological survey on the fields of corn. And so that would be in MSA square kilometer. Sorry. Then another important thing in the GBS is that we account separately for static and dynamic impacts. So the static impacts are the stocks of impacts, whereas the dynamic impacts stand for the variation of the stocks during a period of assessment. So on the slide, you have an example for a company at the year N. So for instance, the static impact associated to land use would be here the 1,000 square meter facilities that already existed at the beginning of the year of assessment, whereas the dynamic impact associated to land use would be the new 100 square meter storage that was constructed during the year of assessment. So then, of course, the principle is that at the year n+1, the dynamic impacts of the year n will be assessed as static impact in the next year. So now about the perimeter of the assessment. In the GBS, we use the concept of scopes already used in carbon footprinting. So we can assess the impact on the entire value chain. We can assess, of course, the scope 1, so the direct operations, also the scope 2, so the impacts due to energy purchases, and also the scope 3, upstream and downstream. So the scope 3 upstream will be the impacts due to other purchases, and the scope 3 downstreams, the impacts of the use and also the end of life of the products and services. So maybe to go back a bit on the Menti, we would be interested to know whether your company uses these notions of scopes from the GHG protocol. Yeah. So usually these notions are kind of familiar if you are already familiar with the carbon footprinting tools. Yeah. Great. Okay, and to conclude on this part, we conducted a broad overview of the company that already set targets concerning biodiversity. So here is an extract of this list with different kinds of targets. In the slides that will be sent to you, we will provide the entire list, and please feel free to contact us if you see any company that would be missing on the list, because the aim is really to be the most exhaustive as possible. So about the targets, there is different kinds of targets that can be set. The two main kinds of targets are first about the state of biodiversity, and then about the contribution to pressures exerted on biodiversity. So for instance, if I take the last example on this slide, which is the Grupo Red Eléctrica, which is an energy industry, you can see that this company sets targets on both state of biodiversity and on pressures on biodiversity. So about the state of biodiversity, this company aims at having a positive impact on its facilities and also in the vicinity of these facilities. And about the pressures, the company sets targets both about the water consumption and also about the use of phytosanitary products. Okay, so I will hand over the mic to Amandine in order to talk more about the biodiversity footprint assessment.
Thank you, Violette. Thank you very much. We're going back to the Menti to see if we have some questions. So I think there are some questions. Let's see. Okay, so one of the questions is, did you consider the impacts of goods in freshwater and oceans biodiversity? So yes, as you can see in the presentation, we answered these questions. We're measuring the impacts on terrestrial and freshwater biodiversity. Oceans biodiversity is not yet covered. And yes, we take into account the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides through the different pressures such as land use and ecotoxicity. So what does MSA stand for and how is it calculated? It stands for mean species abundance, and we just explained that in the presentation and how we calculate it. About ISSB, I will let Joshua answer this one maybe.
Yes, but maybe Manon, we can take only the questions with at least 3 or 4 likes to save time, and but I can answer this one now. So as far as we know, at this stage, there is no work on biodiversity at the ISSB, but we do expect at some point that they will cover biodiversity, just like IFRAG is covering biodiversity. And so we will follow that closely, and we are in touch with the different. We are going to come back to that convergence space, etc., at the end of the presentation. So please do stay until the end. But we do follow ISSB and other initiatives like IFRAG, the taxonomy at the EU level, etc., to make sure it is aligned with what we are doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Joshua. So I will go back to the presentation, and I will hand over to Amandine to explain you how we do biodiversity footprint assessments.
Yes, thank you, Manon. So I hope you have more knowledge now on how we are assessing a biodiversity footprint. So now we will go into more details on what is the context of a biodiversity footprint assessment for companies, what is the methodology, and what are the objectives. So basically, a BFA, so a biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS follows 4 steps. So the first step is the framing step, where we define the perimeter of the assessment, but also identify biodiversity issues at a sectoral level for the company. Then in the second step, it is the data collection, which is a really important step, which is key, because at this step, we are collecting the company data necessary to compute the company's specific biodiversity impacts. So it is one of the most time-consuming parts because the company need to consolidate all the data internally, which is not always available. So assumptions also needs to be performed sometimes. And after this data collection, we can compute biodiversity impacts that are then analyzed in the 4th step, where we have a quantitative but also a qualitative analysis to identify the major biodiversity impacts through the whole value chain and also identify the sources of these impacts. And with those results, it is also possible to identify some impact reductions targets, for example, and set trajectories for 2030 and 2050 to be aligned with the global targets mentioned by Justine before, and also set priority action to reduce biodiversity impacts. And following the assessment, then the company can take concrete actions to reduce or avoid biodiversity impacts, but also even regenerate biodiversity. So focusing more about data, so Violette has presented you the model, so we are able to integrate several types of data that are presented in the slide. So it goes really from generic data like turnover or purchases data, which compute default biodiversity impacts with higher uncertainties than the other types of data. But we are also able to collect products or raw materials that are more precise to compute biodiversity impacts. For those data, we are collecting the quantity of raw materials or other products purchased, but also produced. And the most accurate data to collect are the physical flows and the pressures data, like greenhouse gas emissions, water consumptions, land surface, or even pollutants emissions. You also need to know that CDC Biodiversité is a partner of the corporate engagement program from the SBTN, and we are aligning our biodiversity footprint assessment methodology with the SBTN recommendations. So specifically on the first steps, we are proposing a sector level materiality assessment using the SBTN tool or the Anchor database. Based on the screening or a biodiversity footprint assessment results, we can build a value chain hotspot assessment, which is highlighting the most impactful industries from the company value chain. And we can also integrate, if known, the specific impactful suppliers as well. And at least the company level refinement is going really deeper into the analysis and the detail of the biodiversity impacts per pressures and per scope. Yes, and then on the step 2 of the SBTN is not yet really clear and still under development by the SBTN, but the aim is to interpret and prioritize the results from the step 1. And this step is today achieved thanks to the levels of influence a company has to reduce each impact. So indeed, in the GBS, we can integrate this level of influence on each data, and it allows to understand where the company can easily take action and have mid or short-term positive effects on biodiversity. And then the step 3 is also under development, but at CDC Biodiversité, we are giving some first element to define the company baseline and on which the company will be able to define clear science-based targets and disclose it. If you would like to have more information on the alignment of the GBS with the SBTN recommendation, we have dedicated a specific webinar in March, which is available on YouTube. So really go look at it if you're interested. And as Violette presented you before, so we are using the MSA square kilometer as a results unit. But to be more concrete, we usually translate it into area equivalent, so it's more visible for the company and more useful for the sensitization. So, for example, for a terrestrial static impact of 36 million MSA square kilometer is equivalent to the loss of Europe, North America, and Oceania combined. So it's really easy to picture what would be the impact of a result, a BFA results. And in addition to the results in absolute, so in MSA square kilometers, the GBS is also computing intensity of impact. So in MSA square kilometers per euro spent, for example, and thus it allows to, Manon, can you just switch the slide? Yes, thank you. And so we are able to compute the intensity of impact, so which allows us to compare the company assessed to other companies from the same sector. So indeed, we are publishing sectoral fact sheets benchmark, which give the common trend of the biodiversity impacts for each sector. So we have already published a fact sheet for 2 sectors, so the agriculture and the agri-food, and for chemicals, which is available on our website. And we have published the construction sector, but which is still under consultation by construction companies. And we are currently working on the energy benchmark fact sheet that we will publish in autumn. And then you have also on the table, on the right table, the list of the future sectors that will be covered by the fact sheet. And you need to know that the sectors that has already been published or are under construction and consultation are high priority sectors targeted by the National Biodiversity Action Plan. So where it's important to have more knowledge on those sectors. And according to the development of the GBS and the publication of the benchmark fact sheets, all the industry sectors are not can be prioritized on, and some of them may be more complex to address with the GBS. So, for example, the mature sector available in the GBS are the raw materials extraction, the agriculture and agri-food, or the energy. where we already have detailed and refined impact factors for those sectors. But for some more complex sectors where biodiversity impacts are not always identified yet, and scientific knowledge is not yet also well developed, like for the distribution, financial, non-financial services, consulting, audit sectors, it's today difficult to have precise impacts identified, but it's also linked, it's also because those sectors have low impacts compared to agriculture and raw materials extraction, for example. So I hope it gives you a first overview of what is the content and how we are disclosing the biodiversity footprint assessment results. But and now we would like to give you more details about the cost and the duration of a biodiversity footprint. So it really depends on the complexity of the study. Indeed, so you have a list of what are the parameters that define the complexity of the study. So, for example, a study can be more or less complex according to the assessed perimeter. If it's big companies, it will be more complex than a small companies. But also when the data are not available at the company level and where assumptions are needed, it also complexify the BFA. So it's also increased the cost and the duration. And to give you some figures, so for relatively simple cases, we estimate a biodiversity footprint costs between 35 and 65,000 euros. For intermediate cases, more between 50,000 and 100,000, and for more complex cases, it can go until 150,000 euros. So if you're here, it means that you are interested in the biodiversity footprint, but it's quite a new topic, but it's growing. That's why you're here. And but today, so CDC Biodiversité started its first biodiversity footprint with Schneider Electric and Decathlon in 2020, and now more than 30 BFA have already been realized or are undergoing, and we can see that it's mainly big companies that are leading the way. Indeed, it's a biodiversity is a very big issue, and more and more regulation will occur in the future. So the sooner a company gets more knowledge on its biodiversity impacts, the quicker the company will be able to act and then take action. And so you can see on the table that some of the results are published. So, for example, for Hermès, who has published it in the Universal Registration document. And some are still internal to the company. And we are also working with other consultancy company like TBC or Biodiv Corp, which are all trained as assessors. And so if you would like to do a biodiversity footprint assessment, you can contact us or them to realize one. So I hope it gives you more information about what it is the content of a biodiversity footprint assessment. So would you think at your level that your company might be interested in doing such a biodiversity footprint assessment? And if yes, I hope it will be yes. And if yes, really contact us, do not hesitate.
Okay, thank you very much, Amandine. So going back to the Menti, while you answer these questions, I think there was one question about convergence initiatives. Just for your information, we are talking about that at the end of the webinar. So stay online and you'll have the answer at the end of this webinar. And I think there was also a question about SBTN. Yes, so the SBTN, as you can see, we are a partner of the corporate engagement program. I am personally following all the sessions of this CEP from the SBTN. We are also working with the technical hub of the SBTN specifically for biodiversity. And we have been working with them this week in their minimum viable product workshops that they are holding this week. So we are closely working with them to try to stay up to date with their guidelines and recommendations and to ensure that the GBS is developed and compatible with the SBTN recommendations. Okay, coming back to the presentation, we have Jordan from Hermès on the line, and he's going to present you the case study for Hermès. Jordan, do you hear us?
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. With my mic and my phone on. Okay. So hello everyone, I'm Jordan Ray. I'm a Sustainable Development Manager for Hermès International, which is the corporate for the whole activity in Hermès. I would like first to start to say a few words about Hermès because it's quite a particular company. Because the range of activities that we call métiers are quite broad, and we say we are at the same time a creative company, manufacturing one, and also retail, and with 16 métiers, so kind of different type of production, which are mainly located in France, and but we also add on our own distribution 300 shops. And of course, we have a CSR strategy, in which one we have a biodiversity strategy, which is as follow in the slides. So in 4 pillars, which are act, train, collaborate, and assess. And the GBS goes in our assess pillar. And we link this strategy since 2018 with the Act for Nature and then Act for Nature International. So yes, so I will talk about only GBS today, but we also obviously made different action on biodiversity, as you can read on this slide. So why we choose GBS? Because it's a way to really apply on our strategy, as I said, for our assess pillar. And we would like a tool that can be similar in the comprehension as what we do for the GES emission, and that's a possibility that is offered by GBS. It's you can define with a single metric a baseline, so MSA, and it will be really useful for us to know where we stand, and then in the future to record our progress. And also we choose GBS to identify hotspots in our life cycle in order to act and to link or act with the GBS. So this project was a very important collaboration. It started in 2020, I guess, early 2020. So we had data for 2019, and VVF France was the project leader with the technical push of CDC Biodiversity. And in Hermès, here in corporate, we were the project leader, but we were very, very helped by all the experts in the different business units of the company. Yes, so this is to say you cannot do it alone. You have to make a collaboration internally and also with the technical experts. So as I said, Hermès is quite particular with a broad variety of activities, and also the fact that we've got very integrated supply chain. And so, for instance, in some activities, we got farms. So we got farms, production workshops, and retails. So that's why we have quite broad scope 1 and 2, but also obviously a very broad scope 3, mainly composed of the buying raw materials and all the stuff you can find in a manufacturing company. And we choose to use as group 1, which is obviously the basic bricks of GBS to get the result. We choose our métier. So almost 16 of them, 15 to be precise, with 2 blocks of support, which are distribution and the support. So the data collection, in order to get a result, we use all the panel of kind of data you can find in the GBS methodology. So we get pressure, for instance, of the influence, the analysis of of influence, sorry, in our manufacturing site. We were really helped by our carbon footprint, of course, and also as we have either the control of our production or a very good relationship with our suppliers, we were able to get many physical data. But we also use more modelized tools like the modelization of the feed for the animals and different COMO tools that are specified modelized data for by CDC Biodiversity. Okay, so to see, it was a very broad data collection. So you can see in this slide the result we published as of today in our annual report. We choose to stay for now in the big picture, but obviously we get in the back end all detailed results of our métier and our biodiversity impact. So as you can see on the left, the biodiversity impact, we focus on one specified impact, which is terrestrial dynamic impact, because it's a more robust, I think, and it's representative of our activity because it's really linked to our yearly production and so our yearly impact on biodiversity. And you can see that the leather good has quite a big chunk of it, but it's also a bit normal because it's around 50% of our turnover. But we also learned that more an activity is industrial, the more impact it have on biodiversity, which is not so obvious when we look at our activities. We also make a lead cell comparison exercise to be to try to figure out where we are on the biodiversity impact, as you can see on the right graph. So we compare all the scope of Hermès, so vertically integrated scope, so around from cradle to gate, as we can say, and to see that we are 2 times lower than an average company in just scope 1. So we don't want to draw any strong conclusion on it, but it's quite reassuring that to know that Hermès has quite a content biodiversity impact. And so obviously we already think of the future and what the next step that we will take once we add this assessment. And so, as I said, really for me a really big big question is how we will link our existing biodiversity project or new one and link them to the assessments, because having this baseline and detailed results will help us to focus on the hotspot of our biodiversity impact. And we also identify that we have quite a big impact. It came from area very far on our supply chain, for instance, mainly the feed of animals. And so we will have to lay out more important project with other players and to take collaborative action on it if we really want to have an impact. And also this first assessment, nearly all our scope will be a baseline that we will help us to get into a future international commitment and also follow our master plan. Okay, I think that's all.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jordan. Very interesting. I will switch to the Menti to see if we have questions for you. So I don't think there are questions specifically for Hermès. No, there are no questions specifically for Hermès, but if you have, please write them down. And if not, we will send them back to Hermès later. So for the first most liked questions about convergence initiatives, I already answered that. We are going to talk about it at the end of this webinar. You mentioned that the GBS can be used to track biodiversity company's target. Yes, so this question, we already answered it during the presentation of Amandine about biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS. And if you want to know a bit more on this, feel free to contact us. But you have at the beginning of the presentation all the information on the data we use and how we set targets. And we will send the slides after this webinar. How does GBS align or not to other tools available? So this one has also been answered yet with the presentation of the different biodiversity tools. So you can come back to the slides when you receive the presentation, but we have a table who shows the different biodiversity tools, and there you can see that they complement each other, and that, for example, you can have a biodiversity footprint assessment with the GBS and have also complementary information from STAR, for example, because, for example, the risk of extinction is not covered in the GBS. Okay, I see the time. So one last question. This one has been answered. More about the GBS score coverage. This one. Yes, so I answer.
We will answer it.
Okay.
During the finals.
Yes, for these questions, we will answer during the presentation of the offer for financial institutions. It's just after. But first, I'm coming back to the presentation, and we'll have the case study from La Française des Jeux.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Violette. Thank you for joining.
So my name is Léandri. I'm a CSR officer for La Française des Jeux, FDJ, to be more simple, the group. And I'm in charge of the group's biodiversity strategy. So next, please. Thank you. So FDJ Group is the #1 gaming operator in France and the second lottery in Europe. We have a pool of 25 million players. We can find or game offers, in more than 30,000 points of sale in more than 11,000 municipalities. Next, please. So the work carried out with the GBS was done within the framework of our CSR policy and its environmental pillar. Next. Through this pillar, FDJ addresses two major issues, climate change and the loss of biodiversity. Next. So the group's environmental policy has initiated over 15 years ago. With regard to the fight against climate change, we have been carried out our carbon footprints on the 3 scopes since 2007. We have a GAD emission reduction trajectory validated by the SBT initiative, and we have already achieved our objectives. We contribute to carbon neutrality by financing VCS and carbon standard certified projects. And finally, on climate, we are aligned with the recommendation of the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosure. When it comes to biodiversity, 100% of our gaming materials are printed on FSC paper. In 2015, we launched an ephemeral game with a portion of the bets going to WWF to develop 10 environmental protection projects around the world. And finally, for the 3 last years, we have been financing projects called FSC Biodiversity Ecosystem Services, which allow the conservation and restoration of forest ecosystems in France. Next. So now I'm going to show you how we calculated the biodiversity footprint of our gaming materials. Next, thank you. So our original need was to know how to measure our biodiversity footprint, to know where to act effectively. At FDJ, we are well aware of the importance of the protection of the biodiversity. With regard to the climate, no, can we go back? Thank you. With regard to the climate, the achievement of our reduction targets was made possible thanks to the emission calculation metric we had, which allowed us to set up roadmaps with the business lines internally. But for biodiversity, we did not know at that time which metric to choose and therefore how to implement the most appropriate actions. Thank you. So we found the solution in 2020 when we launched a life cycle analysis of our gaming materials. We decided to look at the impact of our entire product range, which include scratch cards, gaming slips for Lotto and Euro Millions. No, can we go back? Thank you. And our game receipts. And we wanted to look at all the stage of their life, from the extraction of the resources to produce them to the end of life. Next, please. Thank you. So the aim of the study was twofold: quantify the impact of gaming materials on the environment and biodiversity, and to build an eco-design roadmap. And concerning biodiversity impacts, it has suggested to us to use the GBS, so that's what we did. Next, please. Thank you. So the study revealed that 98% of the impacts were linked to the use of wood to make the paper used to print our games. Next. But above all, the study enabled us to determine both a static impact and a dynamic impact for each gaming material, which allowed us to compare ourselves with reference data. Next. But most importantly, to be able to compare the gaming material between them to find out which had the most impact on biodiversity. Next, please. But one point that came out of the study was that the fact that our gaming materials are printed on FSC paper are not being taken into account in the study. And the FSC standard is has the purpose to enable forestry operators to reduce their impact on forest ecosystem. So therefore, we set up a working group with CDC Biodiversity, FSC, and WWF to determine the avoided impacts on biodiversity by sourcing FSC wood and update our 2020 data. Next, please. Thank you. In a very macro way, what I can tell you is that the study showed us that there is a remaining biodiversity per unit area in FSC certified forest, more important, which means a better ecosystem quality, because we have biodiversity rich non-productive areas that are included in those forests. So for FDJ, next please, the GBS tools serve many purposes. It has allowed us to enhance past action with the FSC project. In other words, it allowed us to confirm our past choices with the internal business lines, raise awareness among employees, and motivate them to go further. And concerning the study of the biodiversity footprint of our gaming materials, it has enabled us to launch an eco-design project to challenge our partners, in particular the other European lotteries, and to justify these actions internally. So thank you for listening, and I'm here if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Eliette. Very interesting. I'm checking on the Menti, but I don't think we have specific questions. No, there's no specific questions regarding FDJ or Hermès. To answer some of the questions, so this there's one we're going to answer it during the finance presentation that is following, and I'm coming back to the presentation. Just a quick information on the Menti. You have this question about the company you represent. It's important for you to answer this one if you want us to contact you, because the next question is saying if you're interested in doing biodiversity footprint assessment or joining the clubs, for example. So please answer this question if you want us to contact you. Okay, coming back to the presentation. I'm going to present you more information about the GBS for financial institutions. Just a quick reminder of the GBS ecosystem. As you've seen, we have already presented how the GBS can be used for companies to realize biodiversity footprint assessment, and you have seen examples from some of the companies who've been doing that. But for financial institutions, we have two offers possible. We have an offer, a customized offer called GBS FI for non-listed assets that we launched in 2020, and we already have been working with some customers, as you can see here, Mirova, BNP, Maif. And for listed assets, we have launched last summer a database called BIA GBS. This database has been developed with Carbon for Finance, or partner. Carbon for Finance is an environmental data provider. And you can see among the first assessments, we have Caisse des Dépôts, La Financière de l'Échiquier, and Rift. To give you also some information about the regulatory context, you can see here we have a lot of coming regulation at the European level, and we also have regulation transcribed in the French law. So you can see on the left some of the regulations or more for companies to report their impact and dependencies on biodiversity. And I will focus on the regulation for financial institutions. As you can see, we have two main regulations: the European taxonomy, which has as an objective to rank activities through 6 sustainable categories, and one of the categories regarding biodiversity. And the objective is also for financial institutions to publish the share of their sustainable investment. And we also have the SFDR, which aims at having more transparency on obligations on financial products and the reporting. So financial institutions have to report and publish the share of their investments in companies that are located near biodiversity sensitive areas. And all this is also transcribed in the French law through the Article 173 and through the Article 29, specifically with the physical and transition risk, which I will detail right after that. So in terms of assets covered by the GBS, as already said, we can cover listed shares and bonds through the BIA GBS database, and we can cover private equity, infrastructure, real estate, or forestry assets through customized services with the GBS FI author. And for other assets, we do not have on-shelf methodology, but we can develop something. So feel free to contact us if you want to be to run a GBS assessment on other assets. Some more information about the BIA GBS database. So as I said, it has been created with Carbon for Finance, which is an environmental data expert specifically on carbon data, carbon footprint data. It has been launched in July 2021, and the goal is to measure the impacts of large investment portfolios on biodiversity and to feed the reporting of financial institutions on biodiversity. So we are covering listed shares, listed bonds, and also sovereign bonds. And you can see among the first users, we have La Banque Postale Asset Management, we have Maïf, we have La Financière de l'Échiquier, who is with us today. We already have between 10 to 15 customers today. And you can see on the right here an example of results with BIA GBS. So for example, Maïf, which is an insurance French company, has a static terrestrial impact of 2000 MSA square kilometer. And we have translated this in a surface equivalent, and it corresponds to, for example, the artificialization of the Yvelines department, one of the, you can see in orange here, one department of France. And we can do the same with dynamic terrestrial impacts. So each year, Maïf has the Maïf portfolio has a dynamic terrestrial impact of 58 MSA square kilometer, and it represents half of Paris intramuros surface. Going about a bit further on double materiality, so the GBS is also working on the double materiality approach, which is proposed through the TNFD and also transcribed in the French law through the Article 29. So double materiality is regarding transition risk and physical risk. So transition risk is how companies adapt to biodiversity, and it's measured through the impact of the portfolio on biodiversity. And we are doing this with GBS for listed assets and with our GBS FI author for unlisted assets. And the physical risk is measured through the portfolio's dependency on ecosystem services. And we can also use GBS, but combined with ENCORE data from the ENCORE database. And the deliverables regarding these risks are for the transition risk, we have an element score expressed in MSA square kilometer from the GBS. And for the physical risk, it's a dependency score in percent. And if you want to know more information on the double materiality approach with the GBS, you can read the paper from the French Central Bank, a Silent Spring paper that has been done with CDC Biodiversité and the French Office for Biodiversity and the French Development Agency, and it has measured the impact of French financial institution investment portfolios through this double materiality approach. Also regarding TNFD, as probably some of you already know, TNFD has released a beta framework to help institutions working on biodiversity impacts. So the beta framework is called the LEAP process to locate, evaluate, assess, and prepare. And with the GBS database, we can already work on the evaluate step and the prepare step. As you can see here, we have the impact analysis in the GBS database, so it's done through evaluate step, and we can partially also work on the E1 to E3 steps of evaluate about dependencies of assets and to ecosystem services. Regarding the prepare step, it is also partially feasible with GBS for P2 to P4 sub-steps, so regarding performance management, reporting, and the presentation of the results. So now coming back to the Menti, would you be interested in the GBS proposals for financial institutions? I'm going back to it. So remember to give us the name of your company or your financial institution. Okay. So while you're answering the questions, I will go back to the slides, and we have Valentin connected with us, who will present you a case study of the use of GBS for la financière de l'échiquier. Valentin.
Hello, hi everyone.
Hello.
Hi, thank you. So I will present you today how we use GBS at la financière de l'échiquier. So maybe just a short introduction. So my name is Valentin. I'm an SRI analyst within the ESG research team. La financière de l'échiquier is an independent asset manager. We manage approximately 12 billion euro actually among debt and equity funds, around 30 funds. And in 2020, we decided to reinforce our actions toward climate and biodiversity, and we launched our climate and biodiversity strategy with 9 engagements. And So we wanted to reinforce the integration of climate and biodiversity issue into our investments. Specifically on biodiversity, we also signed the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge, an investor initiative, regrouping now thousands of billions under management with the goal to protect biodiversity and reverse biodiversity loss. And we also launched an impact fund, impact equity funds, Eshiki Climate and Biodiversity Impact Europe, which aim to protect biodiversity and reduce carbon emission for company within Europe. And this to answer these two goals that we decided to select BIA GBS. First, to answer the engagement we took toward the pledge, and also to help our portfolio manager to integrate these issues. Concretely, after 1 year using the database, what we actually did. First, we released last week our first climate and biodiversity report. Within this report, we were able to evaluate the biodiversity footprint of all our portfolios, as you can see on the left side of the screen. So it was really useful, and we were really satisfied with the coverage of issuer. As you may see, it depends of the investment strategy. For example, you can see on the left column, it's the coverage, and you can see that for specific fund investing in, for example, micro cap, the coverage is only 18%, but for the vast majority of our funds, the coverage is really satisfying, up to almost 100 for big cap in Europe. So it was a very first interesting step to be able to report to our stakeholders, and more specifically our clients, and to provide useful indicators for our portfolio management to be able to manage and to integrate more biodiversity within their investment decisions. So for example, here you have a screenshot of the database that our portfolio manager can use to see the evaluated impact of their portfolio. So it's compared with the benchmark. They can see what are the sector that have the most impact, what are the holding, the issuer that have the most impact on biodiversity, and especially on what pressure. And this is useful because at La Financière de l'Échiquier, we value a lot internal research and qualitative research. So we develop, especially for our impact fund, Échiquier Climate and Biodiversity Impact, an internal methodology called Climate and Biodiversity Maturity, which is a holistic view of the maturity of issuer on biodiversity and climate. And if you can go to the next slide. So this is another use of BIA GBS data, is that for specific issuer, we can have an evaluation of the impact both on carbon and biodiversity. And we use this data to help portfolio manager to really understand where are the best, the most materiality issue on this subject to answer our internal tool. So for example, we can see, I think this one is Air Liquide, and we can see that the biggest pressure is climate change. So we also have, this is a use of BIA GBS, it also integrates the climate data from Carbon for Finance that we also use for the grade, and also the other pressure, for example, here it's land use, that we can focus our qualitative research on to combine data, quantitative data and qualitative data. Because maybe to sum up our use after 1 year, the positive element, as I say, is coverage to have a very good first step to evaluate the impact of our portfolios depending on allocation, and try to learn more about biodiversity impact, and it's a very good step for our portfolio manager to try to integrate more these issues within the investment decision. However, the limit at the moment is that within the database, we do not have bottom-up analysis. So the data do not reflect positive impact on biodiversity for the moment, and not allow internal comparison within issue of the same sector. So this is why we need to combine both quantitative data with qualitative approach to be able to be our job of stock picker and select companies that have the best positive impact on biodiversity, or the company within a sector that are able to reduce more the impact on biodiversity. So to conclude, the tool is a very good first step in our journey to integrate more these issues within our investment decision. Too early to use it specifically within investment process, like for data screening and so, but it helps. And the combination of quantitative and qualitative allow us to progress on this topic. So it was a short presentation, but I'm also here to answer all of the questions you may have on our use of the tool at the moment.
Thank you very much, Valentin. Very interesting. I hope it answers some of the questions from the participant. I think we have maybe one question. I'm going back to the Menti. So how does this data drive financial valuation and investment decision for your company using biodiversity data? Maybe Valentin, I'll let you answer this one.
Yes, as I said, for the moment, we do not use quantitative data on valuation because as it is only sectorial data, and I'm losing my words, but it's we can't compare. Like it's modelized data, that's what I want to say. So we do not use it for financial valuation at the moment. We use it to help our portfolio management to really understand within each sector what would be the most material issue that they need to pay attention, and so they use it to do more qualitative work. And we use it within our internal tool, as I said, maturity, climate and biodiversity maturity score, which is a scoring that we do on several topics: governance, climate, biodiversity roadmaps, and we also looked at controversies. But for the moment, this is the main limit we see at the moment. We are waiting for the bottom-up analysis to really be able to integrate data within evaluation.
Okay, thank you very much, Valentin. I don't think there are any other questions regarding your case study. This one we already answered. So about chemical pollution and agrochemical use, I think we have already answered this question at the beginning of the presentation. But yes, it is taken into account in the land use pressure and ecotoxicity pressure that we cover in the GBS. How much does a score differ depending on usage of company level data versus usage of general regional data? So yes, there is a difference in the GBS when we use general regional data and financial data. We can do what we call a screening of impacts. So we estimate the impacts with this general data. So it gives you an impact regarding your sector and your industry sector. So it's a very generic assessment. And if you do the full biodiversity footprint assessment using more specific data, such as raw materials or GHG emissions or water consumptions or land use information, then we will be able to refine the impacts and get results that are really specific to your company. When we do a screening, it's a smaller budget, but it's less precise and less reliable results. And also, if another company from your sector is doing the screening, you will have very similar results. It will not be very specific to your company. Okay. This question, I think, Joshua, you can answer it.
Yes. So on the GBS, it has many specific layers that are not in other tools. It's using the mean species abundance as other tools, but it includes more pressures than some other tools like biodiversity footprint calculator or biodiversity impact metric. And it includes a proprietary component in the middle, as explained earlier in the presentation, which is between the Global Bio model, which is the pressure impact model, which goes from pressures to MSA square kilometers, and the inventory data, which we obtain either from corporates directly or from the Exaio-based model. So when we have tonnages of copper, tonnages of cotton, weights, etc., we have proprietary tools to go from the tonnages to the pressures, and then we use Global Bio to link to the impacts, and of course all the user interface, etc. So the GBS is more comprehensive in terms of coverage of sectors, more user-friendly and dedicated to conducting assessments for corporates, but also providing the way to assess financial assets, etc. And about this one, yes, maybe we were not clear when we explained, but obviously we do agree about double materiality going beyond financial risks and including risks to nature, which is, among other things, transition risks. So we do agree with what is written here.
Yes, thank you very much, Joshua. So this next question on convergence tools, we are answering this question at the end of the webinar. We have a dedicated section for convergence on biodiversity footprint, and we will talk about ALIGN, for example, the ALIGN project that we are working with. Okay, maybe Justine, you can answer this question.
Yes. Terrestrial impact does not include inland water habitats, but they are in freshwater impact. So in freshwater impact, we are dealing with hydrological disturbance due to direct water use, for example, so flow deviation in rivers. And we also deal with impacts of lake, for example, for hydropower lake. And we also are including wetland conversion. So we actually include those impacts in freshwater impact, but not actually underground water. Underground water is not yet taken into account.
Okay, thank you very much, Justine. And I think there was just here, not a question, but yes, for sure, we can send you a certificate just to let you know. And I think I will go back to the presentation and we'll have more information on the club. Okay, Justine.
Yes, thank you, Manon. So now I'm going to present the B4B+ Club, which is the club of businesses and financial institutions for positive biodiversity. So first, I need to present you how we see the GBS ecosystem. So first, CDC Biodiversité is still improving the GBS, so developing some impact factors for the GBS. But we are also working on a GBS for local authorities. Then we are selling biodiversity footprint assessment to companies, but also ratings to financial institutions. And we are training people to use the GBS, so consultants to sell BFA, companies to do their biodiversity footprint assessments internally, or academics to use the GBS, and data providers to sell ratings to financial institutions. And soon we will develop GBS verified, so hopefully at the early 2023 to sell assurance to companies and financial institutions on their BFAs. So here you have the current members of the club and partners also. So we are working within 3 working groups, value chain, finance, and consultants. And you can see here that we have almost more than 40 members and partners today as we speak. And some of them are still using the GBS internally, like Decathlon, or they are working on their biodiversity footprint assessment with us or with other consultants, or they just want to know more about biodiversity footprint assessment. So for the goal of the B4B+ Club, the B4B+ Club provides information, but also several services to its members. First, it helps to understand how biodiversity footprint assessment tools can serve companies' decision within the feedbacks of other members and with discussions within the working groups. It also helps anticipating financial regulatory markets developments, because CDC Biodiversité is involved within the major reporting and convergence frameworks, like the TNFD, so Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosure, the SBTN, or the European Commission Project Align. Violette will tell you more about it at the end of the presentation. And it gives the possibility to have case studies done by CDC Biodiversité, so the members are able to test the adaptation of the GBS to their constraints and needs. And it also keeps companies and investors updated about the biodiversity footprint assessment with the intervention of external experts and also regular bibliographic monitoring. And yeah, you will also have technical support to help you carry out BFAs. And so here you have the detailed content of the club. So within the 3 topics, stakeholders ecosystem with working groups, and also some speakers coming to the working groups on specific topics on biodiversity footprint assessment. So for example, we had Romy Godike from UNEP-FI, Alain Vidal from the SBTN, and also Rima Ruxen from FI project. We also have literature review, updates about BFAs, but also about the GBS on the new developments of the GBS. We also have a technical support within the club with webinars and yeah, also 5 hours of individual supports. You can ask to carry out a case study within the club for €7,500. And you also have a priority access to training courses and some discount for some trainings. And you have included a trademark license, one for internal use, if you are a company or financial institution, or 2 nominative license if you are a consultant. And the membership is €7,500 per year or 7,000 euro per year for 3 years and more. And we are soon, so on the 30th of June, we'll launch the first international working groups. Here you have the detail for the license, how it's working for the license. So if you are a consultant, you need to join the B4B Plus Club to have a technical support and helps for conducting your BFA. And you also have to be trained level 2 assessor. If you are a company, so just using the GBS internally, but not publishing the results, you can have just a license. But if you are publishing the results, you need to be trained level 2. And if you are a company not using the GBS, but publishing the results, so if you are working with consulting companies, you need also to have a license. So here you have also the license fee. So it's €1,500 per year. And finally, you also have a technical support, as I said, because the GBS is constantly improving, and so some problems may occur. So you can, we have a ticket system that you can use to report your problem or your questions. And also you have 5 hours of individual support. And also we are doing technical support webinars where everyone can ask their questions and you can see the questions of other users. And actually, yes, if you want to know more and to see some testimonies from our members, you can watch the last webinar we did on the B4B Plus Club. So you have the replay and also the slides here if you want. And yeah, if we go back to the Menti, just for us to know, are you interested in joining the B4B Plus Club? And that's it. And after, I think we can switch to the questions. It is very expensive for, so it's medium and small enterprise. Are there solutions for them available too? So maybe Violette, you can answer this.
Yeah, of course, this can be a cost, and especially for SMEs. So maybe in the first step, we advise you to have a screening of the materiality of your impact and dependencies on biodiversity, for instance, using the Encore database, which will give you this kind of sectorial screening. Then another possibility is to have a screening using only financial data. So there is some GBS certified consultants that already conducted this kind of experiments. And also we are currently discussing with private equity actors in order to have fundings to develop solutions to assess this kind of companies through the investors.
Thank you very much, Violette. Next question, would GBS be open to make a presentation on the GBS in the Brazilian Sustainable Finance Forum? Thank you, congrats. Thank you very much. Yes, I think we can talk about this, you can contact us on our GBS mail. It's gbs at cdcbiodiversité.fr. I think we are going to put the email address in the chat, and it's also in the slides at the end. And I think we are going back to the presentation to show you the trainings. Amandine, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks. So as Justine mentioned before, so we are offering trainings to sensitize people on the sorry, I don't know if you heard me. I didn't have my mic. So we are offering trainings to sensitize people on the biodiversity issues, but we are also offering training to use the tool that we have developed, so the GBS. So the sensitization trainings, we are offering two sensitization training, one on the fundamentals of biodiversity footprint, which is a beginner training allowing to better understand biodiversity topics and biodiversity erosion challenges. And the other one is more specific for financial institutions to get better knowledge on the regulatory framework and related risks, and what are the tools and initiatives available for the financial sector. And we are offering two other trainings. So on how to use the GBS. So the first training is the level 1, which is an introduction to the GBS tool and to the biodiversity footprint assessment. And the level 2 is really to better understand how to use it practically and operationally, and at the end use it for a real biodiversity footprint assessment. So if we are going a bit deeper into the training format details, so the level 1 is in 1 day and cost approximately cost 1,600 euros per trainee, and we will have a session in October. So really, and we only have 15 places. So really, if you are interested in doing GBS training, you should register as soon as possible. And for the level 2, which is really useful and a prerequisite to then use the GBS tool, you need to do the level 2 training, which is in 2 days, and costs 3,500 euro per trainees. And we will have 2 sessions for level 1 and level 2 in October. So please register if you're interested. And that's the goal of the Menti question here. So please respond if you are interested in a GBS training. So next one is in October, but we will have some other in the future and in 2023. Yes. And so about the fundamentals and the more, yes, sensitization training on biodiversity topics. So the first one is the fundamentals of biodiversity footprint. So the objective is really to understand the stakes and the key concept of biodiversity footprint assessment, and it will integrate some topics like understand the causes and stakes around biodiversity loss, get familiar with the international and regulatory frameworks, understand what is a biodiversity footprint, what are the metrics, the existing tools, etc. So really going more into detail than this webinar, and it will also introduce how we can use it for assessing a biodiversity footprint for a company. And it is really open to anyone which is interesting, and we are proposing it in an online format like a MOOC, and followed with half hour 1.5 hour classes to deep dive into a real case study. And it costs €500 per person, and we will have 2 dates at the end of the year, so one in September and one in December. And it will be in English, so it's available for people worldwide. And about the second training that we are proposing, so it's more for financial institution, and the aim is to get familiar with the biodiversity framework, the regulation, the related risk, and the biodiversity footprint tools available. And the content will be to get familiar with the footprint, the framework, but also learn more about the double materiality approach and discover the available tools. And it's so specific for financial institution, but it's also open to everyone which is interested in that topic. So it's the format is 2 half-day. And it's online in English. So yes, it's available for people worldwide. So if you are interested and if you're not coming from a European time zone, we suggest you to subscribe early, so we are able to set the slot of the classes for with a convenient time for your time zone, adapted to your time zone. So we have a last question for you on the Menti. So would you be interested in doing this training? So please go back on the menti.com and answer to the question. I hope we didn't lost you too much with all of those information. And yes, so we will switch the topic. So I hope you get more knowledge on everything on the GBS and the trainings, etc., with the ecosystem. But now we will come back more on the assurance and the robustness of the work that we have done through the years. So we have conducted in 2020 critical review committee in order to ensure the most transparency and consistency of our tool. So the aim was really to verify the consistency and the quality of the tool based on its goals, scope, and limits, suggest improvements to the tool, but also assess the consistency and the relevance with other existing tools, but also public policies. And so to do this, we have gathered several biodiversity actors. So the secretariat was led by the French biodiversity offices, which is really the French institution dealing with all the biodiversity topics. And then the technical assistance was led by Solinen, and we also had an expert panel in charge of the robustness. In charge of the robustness of the tool, and a stakeholder panel in charge of the utility and consistency of the tool. And online you have all the technical reports, which is really developing the GBS methodology, so it explains everything. So if you are interested in more to understand more the concepts and the technical background, you can have a look at it on the internet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amandine. And I think we are now having Violette, who will present the convergence initiatives around biodiversity footprint.
Okay, so to conclude on this webinar, we will talk more about the different initiatives that aim at having a convergence about biodiversity reporting and frameworks. So CDC Biodiversité has been involved in various kinds of initiatives since the beginning of the GBS project in 2016. So first about the reporting initiatives. At the international level, we are very involved in the TNFD, so the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. We are, and the Caisse de Dépôt group is also a member of the TNFD forum, and we had a lot of discussion with the TNFD members, especially following the publication of the first beta framework back in March, I think. We are currently working on projects of pilot testing, both for financial institutions and also for corporates. So that will last until first trimester of 2023. We follow also the European initiatives, so the CSRD, the Green Taxonomy, Joshua already talked about it, and of course the SFDR also on the financial institutions side. We entered the different consultations on these regulations, and so we follow them closely, and we saw, especially in the taxonomy, the MSA appeared as a complementary indicator. On the French side, we had also a lot of discussions with the French energy and with the French economic ministry when they created the Article 29 of the French Energy and Climate Law. That is the first law which requires very ambitious biodiversity reporting for financial institutions. And following this law, we conducted with our partner Carbon for Finance Articles 29 for different customers of our common database GBS. We also conducted this kind of reporting for real estate assets. On the methodology side, I will talk more about the online project in the following slides, but we are very involved in the different initiatives, such as the Business at Biodiversity platform that was launched by the European Commission, and we're involved with them in different kinds of initiatives. We are part of Align. We contributed to the GRI standards, so the GRI standards are currently being reviewed, and we gave a lot of suggestions to the GRI Secretariat, and we are also part of the SBTN as we talked about previously. Maybe a brief focus on the Align project. So the aim of Align is to converge from a technical point of view on the biodiversity reporting. So to have the same vocabulary, the same, not the same tools, but tools that would be coherent and compatible between them in order to have really a good framework at the international level. So the Align project was launched in 2021, and we are waiting for the measurement standard to be published next year in 2023. To conclude about another initiatives, which is the Biological Diversity Protocol. So this BD protocol aims at having also a common conceptual framework for the accounting of biodiversity. And the first report was published in March 2021. As you can see on the slide, there was a proof of concept conducted with the application of the BD protocol of, with a GBS assessment. So you can see on the slide that the BD protocol suggests 2 accounts for accumulated negative impacts and accumulative positive impacts. So in the case of the GBS, that is what we account in the static impacts. But what is also not shown in these slides is that the BD protocol also suggests to take the dynamic impacts into account. So we can see that this protocol really fits quite well with what is suggested in the GBS-based assessment.
Okay, thank you very much, Violette. And just last information for today. At the end of this presentation, you will have all the links. If you want to read our publications, we have a publication every year about the GBS and biodiversity footprint assessment for companies or financial institutions. Some of them are more technical, so you can go through them and learn more about the GBS and what we do here at CDC Biodiversité. It's also all available on our website. I think I will go back to the mentee to see if there are some last questions. So maybe Joshua, if you're still here.
Yes. So the internal costs and resources needed for the company to conduct an assessment, and also for the consultants, you have a good example in a case study we published with the Business and Biodiversity platform of the European Union. So I'm going to put the link on the chat, and it's about more or less the same time spent internally to collect data than the consultants doing the assessment, or if it's done fully internally, then it's double the time basically, and that's more or less 40 days of work. But you have more details in the document I'm going to link. So Manon, while you check who is going to answer this question, I'm going to answer the next one actually. So do you know when the GBS is going to be updated to comply with the taxonomy? So as I said at the beginning of the webinar, the GBS is linked to the taxonomy, and for instance, in the benchmark fact sheet that we are producing, we list the do no significant harm criteria, and we contribute to the consultation of the EFRAG and the taxonomy to link that to MSA, etc. But specifically to have a report saying if a site or a company is green or not, or complying with the do no significant harm criteria or not, we are studying that. We've got requests for that, but we don't have a plan yet on when it's going to be available. So I cannot say anything about that at this stage. And other tools more advanced on the topic, as far as I know, no tool is doing any kind of screening of compliance and report to say whether you comply or not. And I don't think they are working on that. So I would say we are a bit more advanced, but not that much compared to the others.
Okay, thank you, Joshua. And then the last question, do you only assess companies who ask for biodiversity assessment, or do you plan to assess the whole universe of companies held by CDC? So yes, for instance, we are assessing companies who ask for biodiversity assessment, and we're doing this, as you've seen through the presentation, with the GBS for companies, but also with GBS-FI and BI-GBS for financial institutions. And for the second question, do you plan to assess the whole universe of companies held by CDC Biodiversité? Yes, we would like to do this, and we are already trying to do this with the BI-GBS database that is assessing large listed asset portfolios, and the GBS-FI solution, which is assessing other non-listed asset portfolios. But yes, it would be really useful if companies and financial institutions could assess their impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. Okay, no more questions. So thank you very much for joining this webinar. It was a pleasure to present you all we do with the GBS and the biodiversity footprint. If you have any questions, you can contact us. You have here the mail address, and also in the chat we sent you the mail address for the GBS team. So yes, thank you very much, and have a nice day.